This is a sermon from Hounslow Town Church. We meet every Sunday at 9:45 in the Arts Center, located in the Treaty Center on Hounslow High Street. For more information and resources, please visit hounslowtownchurch.org.
Most of you know my little dog, Reese. If you visited my house, I know he's probably barked at you. If you are tall, if you are in any way threatening, if you have facial hair, he doesn't like facial hair, and he doesn't like tall men. So if you are somewhat tall and muscular and you have facial hair, he might have done more than just bark at you. He might have growled at you. He might have even tried to bite you. But in general, Reese will give one little bark, and then he'll be happy with you. So Reese can be threatening, but I hope your experience with him is one that has been warm and positive. It's that way to our family. He's our family dog. But here's the thing about Reese. Reese is entirely dependent upon our family. I'm absolutely convinced that if Reese did not have a family to shepherd him, to protect him, to provide for him, to watch over him, to feed him, Reese would be a goner. Reese could not survive on the rough streets of Hounslow. He would not find food, and he would not be protected from larger dogs and from all the foxes. The foxes, I'm certain, would do in Reese. That's the thing about Reese. He is a dependent creature. We'll talk later, yeah, Jonathan? Reese is entirely dependent upon my family. That's the thing about Reese. But let me ask you this. Do you know that's also the thing about you? Do you know that there is one on whom you are entirely dependent? This month of August, we are going to spend the next 3 Sundays looking at this one psalm that was read for us so well by Grace. It's a very famous song. I hope you know it. It's the 23rd Psalm. Psalm 23 is a much-loved Psalm of David because it teaches us so much about God. We see so much here about God, but what its particular focus and its particular emphasis is that makes it so loved and so special is how it teaches us how God relates to us as his people. And we see how dependent we are upon God. In Psalm 23, there's this lovely back and forth that's in the psalm in which David says something about God. But as soon as he says something about God, he immediately describes what that means for him. And so there's this. It starts with this he, me, and I want to read it in such a way to really show you this. So here is a reading of Psalm 23. The Lord, he is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And so David begins with this he, me. He's talking about God. But notice what he does in verse 4. It changes. As instead of talking about God, he suddenly becomes personal. The pronoun changes from he to you. He starts to talk to God. So notice this now. From verse 4, he's now addressing God. He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you, talking to God, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Do you hear the power of that? Do you see the depth of the relationship that God has with his people? It's beautiful. It's moving. It's breaking me right now. as we consider how God is so intimate with his people. And so in Psalm 23, we meet God, who is our shepherd, and we see how closely connected he is to us, his people, to us who are his sheep. And so can I ask you, just as a way of introduction, do you know this God? Do you know his closeness, his intimacy? And do you see how dependent we are upon him? You know, dependence, so often we think of it as a bad thing. And it is a bad thing when the one we depend upon is evil and does wrong. You know, so think back to Reese. You know, if the owner of a dog doesn't provide, and there are owners who don't provide, who don't feed for their dog, who don't protect their dog, that's a bad situation. But it's not bad because they're dependent. It's bad because the owner is evil and does wrong. So we have to ask ourselves, who is it that we depend upon? But for a good dog owner, the dog who depends on that owner, there is nothing to fear. And so that's true of us as well. We are dependent creatures. It's not bad to be dependent. We actually all depend on something, someone. We all follow some shepherd. There's no one who's truly independent. We all follow someone or something. The question then is, upon who do you depend? Who is your shepherd? And here, I want to argue, is the gold standard, the absolute best test to measure how good your shepherd is. It comes in three verses, in verse 1, verse 4, verse 7. Here's the picture of a good shepherd. Can you say this upon which you depend? Can you say this with the confidence that David has? Verse 1, he says, I shall not want. Right? Reese can say, I shall not want. I have a good shepherd. I have a good family. They provide for me. Can you say that about your shepherd? I shall not want. Verse 1. Verse 4, I will fear no evil. In verse 7, can you say of your shepherd, I shall dwell with him forever? Whoever you follow, whatever you depend on, can you say that? I think the answer is no, unless your shepherd is the Lord's. Bible scholar Alec Matier, in his commentary on the Psalms, points out that these threefold declarations really are the shape, they're the spine of Psalm 23. In verses 1 to 3, we see God as the shepherd. And because he's the shepherd and we are his sheep, we can claim with David, I shall not want. And then in verse 4, we meet God as our traveling companion. He travels with us. And because he's always with us, we can claim with David, I will fear no evil. And then in verses 5 and 6, we meet God as our host. We meet God who throws a feast. And because we are invited to dine with him, we can say with confidence that I shall dwell with God in his house forever. And so there are three declarations. We have 3 weeks. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to take each one of these. And we're going to slowly go through Psalm 23 and look at God as this week, God as our shepherd, and what it means to say, I shall not want. And then next week, we'll consider the other two. But for today, and that I recognize it was a fairly long introduction just to get to this point for us to consider God as our shepherd. Today, in these first 3 verses, I have an outline for us. I borrowed it from a fellow presbyter, fellow elder in our denomination, the IPC, David Gibson, who wrote a book on Psalm 23. I highly recommend that. If you do want to learn more about these things, his book is outstanding. And so today we'll see, firstly, who he is. Who is our shepherd? Secondly, we'll see what he provides. And thirdly, we'll see where he leads. So that's where we're going right now. So first, let's consider who he is. Verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd. Who is God? Who is God? I think we almost skip over those words, don't we? When we read Psalm 23, we like to get to the green pastures, the still waters. And so we skip over the very first 2 words, the Lord. Who is the Lord? In our English Bibles, the words the Lord are all in capital. Actually, they're not there, but they should be. We did this wrong. In the English Bibles, when the Lord is when all those letters are capitalized, that's the writing, that's the indication that the Hebrew word behind the Lord is his personal name, Yahweh. Yahweh. That name comes first in the Bible in Exodus 3. The first time God gives any one of us his personal name, Yahweh, it was at the burning bush, the story of Moses. It's there where God identifies himself as Yahweh, and he gives to his people his personal name. So the story goes like this. Moses was a shepherd. Notice the shepherd theme. He was a shepherd in Midian. He had left Egypt. He had fled because he had murdered someone, and he was living in Midian. And he came to Mount Horeb, which is Mount Sinai, and where he would receive the Ten Commandments. So this is a really significant thing going on here. There's the Ten Commandments, Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. Moses is a shepherd, and he sees this burning bush. This is a bush that's burning in the desert, and its flame does not go out. And, that's not something that happens in the desert. I was just in a very dry desert place in the southern part of Italy. And, in the desert, stuff burns quickly and is gone. But here's a site in which there's a bush burning, and the bush doesn't disappear, and the flame keeps going. The fire is self-existent, meaning that it exists on its own. And it is self-sufficient, meaning it keeps burning without taking away any fuel. Fires anywhere don't do that. When a fire happens, it consumes all the fuel, and then it goes out. And certainly in the desert, things burn quick and are gone. But here's a flame that doesn't go out. And so Moses goes up to this bush, and he goes to see this sight, and God says to him, I am the God of your father, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. In other words, God identifies him as the covenant God, the God of his forefathers. And so far, he's using language in Scripture that's nothing new. But the new bit then comes in verse 13, when after God says to Moses that he's going to send him back to Egypt to confront Pharaoh and to lead the people out of slavery. And here's what verse 13 says. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Because they didn't know his name up to that point. He says, what should I say to them? God said to him, I am who I am, Yahweh. He said, this is the name. This is to the people of Israel. I say this to the people of Israel. I am Yahweh. I am has sent me to you. That's the personal name of God, Yahweh. I am who I am. And that name, in that name, it says so much about who God is. But I want to focus on the burning bush in the name. You see, I am who I am means that God is self-existent. He is who he is. No one can add to him. No one can take anything away from him. No one can define him other than who he is and who he always has been. He is self-sufficient. He does not depend upon or need anything or anyone. He has all that he needs. He lacks nothing. And when he gives something away, he still lacks nothing. If I gave you all the money from my wallet, I don't have any more money in my wallet, right? I lack that money because I gave it to you. Not so with God. When God gives, he lacks nothing. He has all that he needs. He is self-sufficient. Westminster Confession of Faith, our confessional document, says this. Westminster 2.2 says, God has all life, glory, goodness, blessedness in and of himself. and he alone is and unto himself all sufficient, not standing in need of any creatures which he has made. This is our God. This is the Lord, Yahweh. And it's this God that David says is my shepherd. And because God is my shepherd, that means that my shepherd has everything that he needs. And he has everything which I need and everything which you need. And that means that when he gives to you in generosity, he can give to me in generosity the same amount. It means that he doesn't just give to one person a bit more, and that means he can't give to someone else a bit less. No. He has an unending supply of blessing to his people. He burns with a fire that does not need fuel to be added to it. And so this God, Yahweh, who leads, he also provides for his people. David Gibson in his book says, he shepherds you from eternally undiminished fullness, and he is never poor for it. That is your shepherd. This is your shepherd. If your trust is in him and if you follow him. Do you hear who God is? He has all that we need. And so David can say, I shall not want. How can he say that? It's because of who God is. So first we see who he is. Second, we see then what he provides. And we see what he provides is really everything that David needs. What does David need here? He tells us, right? He needs rest. And so God provides rest. God makes him lie down in green pastures. David needs rest. He needs water in the desert, right? And so God he leads him beside still waters. The picture of the waters, scholars actually say, is a picture of salvation. It's actually, they argue, it's a picture of when God parted the Red Sea and Moses and the people walked through that because there were still waters, right? So it's also a picture not only of providing water in the desert, but it's a picture of salvation, of God delivering his people from slavery. We need salvation, God provides it. We're weary souls. David says, I'm a weary soul. God restores it. David needs guidance. He needs direction. He needs vision. God leads him, it says in verse 3, in the path of righteousness. The point here is that David is incredibly needy and that God meets all of his needs. And so, because this is true of God and he's faithful, do you see how David can say with such confidence, I shall not want. I shall not want. Can I ask you, do you know your neediness? How is it this morning that you feel your neediness? I encourage you to go to the Lord who provides. We, of course, have to be careful with these things, with this promise of I shall not want. This doesn't mean that God will give you whatever you desire. God is not some Santa Claus who dispenses whatever gift we so desire. You know, there are a lot of things that I want in my life. As I reflected briefly, what are some things if you'd say, you could have whatever you want, what would I ask for? And I thought, I think I'd like a nice car, a fast race car. I'd like a fast car. I would like a lot more money in my bank account than I have right now. I would want more holidays. I'd love to go away more. Does it mean that if I pray more to this God that he'll give me what I want, he'll give me these things? Answer, absolutely not. What it means is that what he supplies is actually something so much greater than the things that I just listed. He will satisfy those desires, the desires that I have, that those things represent. He will satisfy those things. So the race car, say you desire a fast car so you can live life on the edge. God actually gives you something that will satisfy that sense of desire for purpose and for adventure and for action. He'll give you a mission in this world that will keep you on the edge of the seat of your life. I promise you that. Whatever thrill you get by driving a race car, follow Christ in mission. It's a far greater ride than that. I will promise you that. If you desire more holidays, what you really are wanting is rest. True rest. The kind of rest that doesn't satisfy your body after a week of lying on the beach, but rather rest for your soul. Rest for your spirit. God will satisfy you. That is a greater rest. Maybe it's more money. You desire more money. He'll satisfy that desire for financial security, which is what that desire for more money is, that you know you'll be secure. He'll satisfy that with a better security, with the promise that you will always be provided for in this life, which he's saying here, and in the life to come. Listen to John Calvin on how God provides for us in the person of Jesus. Calvin says this is beautiful. He says, if we see strength, it lies in his dominion, Christ's dominion. If we seek redemption, it lies in his passion. If acquittal, in his condemnation. If remission of the curse, in his cross. If satisfaction, in his sacrifice. If purification, in his blood. If reconciliation, in his descent into hell. If mortification of the flesh, in his tomb. If newness of life, in his resurrection. If immortality, in the same, in his resurrection. If protection, if security, if abundant supply of all blessings, in his kingdom. If untroubled expectation of judgment, in the power given to him to judge. In short, since rich store of every kind of good abounds in him, let us drink our fill from this foundation and from no other. Did you hear what's being said? How rich our God is and how generous he bestows the greatest blessings we could ever know. You see, what our God gives to us is something so much valuable than the sum total of the wants that I just said, the fast race car and more money in my bank account and more holidays. What he provides is so much greater. He provides what we actually most truly need. That is, he gives us himself. He gives us himself. All those blessings come from being united with Christ. See, Jesus, the way to read Psalm 23, Jesus is this shepherd of Psalm 23. He's the one who has been given to us by God. Jesus identifies himself this way. In John 10:11, I think it's on the screen, he says, I am the good shepherd. So right there, he says, Psalm 23, that's me. I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. What is it that your hearts truly want? What is it that every desire that you have is urging for? It's this right here. It's Jesus, the good shepherd. He truly is the answer to each and every desire of your heart. Whatever it is that you want or that you feel that you need, it's Jesus who shows his love for us, his people, by dying for us, by giving of his life. David Gibson says about these verses that talk of God providing things for us. He says this. He says, the green pastures that David is picturing. You know, the green pasture, isn't it love? We read the green pasture, we think, oh, that's lovely, isn't it? You're in the desert, and in the desert you want water, and you want rest for your soul, and you want green pastures. It's idyllic, right? The green pastures that David is picturing here are found experienced only as we find ourselves in relationship with Jesus, the Good Shepherd. This morning later, we're going to eat at this table set for us today. And this table, I want us to see how this table proclaims to us so loudly so that we can say with confidence, when we eat at this table, we can say, I shall not want. The answers to all that our hearts desire is found right here at this table. Can I ask you, what is it that your heart desires? What is it that you want more of? What is it that you are restless over? That you have a dissatisfaction in your soul? You know, I'm 50 years old, so I can say, I know I'm one of the older ones in this room, so I've lived a bit of life. I've lived here in London. I've lived in New York City. I've seen people come to the city looking for money and looking for relationship, looking for sex, looking for fame, looking for career, looking for work, looking for all sorts of things. It's what their hearts desire. And I can say of all those things now, having seen life, I can say those do not satisfy the deepest longings of your heart. They simply don't. Soul satisfaction, deep soul rest, true peace, true joy in life. These things can only be found in the one who made you and the one who gave you those desires, the one who has redeemed you. That is Jesus. All of the answers of our heart's desires are found in him. That's what he provides. So we see who he is. We see what he provides. Lastly, in brief, let's consider where he leads. Verse 3 says, he leads me. There's the language of leading in verse 2, but let's just look at verse 3. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Our God not only provides, because that's who he is, but he also leads. It means he takes us in a direction. He has a purpose for us. He has a mission for us. He brings us with him. You know, when you go on a hike, you follow along a path. Very, very few people just go off on a walk without following a path. God has a path for you. Others, when you go on a walk, others have clearly, when there's a path, others have gone before you on that path and have prepared a way. Whatever it is they've done. They've laid stones down, they've put markers up, whatever it is. In the wilderness, when there's a path, you know that someone has gone before you. This is saying God has a path for you, and he leads you. He leads us on it. He has a way for us. And he knows the way. He shows us the way. He's with us on the way. He carries us along the way. It means he has a way for us. This path is talking about life, and it means that he has a way for us of how we are to live. And we see there's a goal in his leading. It's the end of this verse. The goal, the purpose of his leading, which we saw last week in the Westminster Catechism when we read the first question. You know, that we saw that the goal and the purpose of our very lives, it's for the sake of the glory of his name. See how verse 3 ends. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That means for his glory, for the glory of his name. So he leads us in life so that his name would be glorified. You see, that means we exist for his glory. And our motivation is that his name would be glorified above all names. You know, when God is glorified, when we glorify God, the reason that we want to do that, the reason that we should say that is absolutely truly the best thing that we could do, right? Because when we glorify God, we instantly remember that he is our shepherd. We remember where our strength comes from. We remember where our life comes from. We remember where our help comes from. When we glorify God and say, God, you are my help. I glorify you. As we say that and as our hearts mean that, our hearts recognize that we are dependent upon him. Do you see how glorifying God as your chief end is actually the best thing that you can do in your life? We want God to get all the glory. John Piper says that when God is most glorified, we actually are most satisfied. So again, the Westminster Confession that we read last week, that our chief end, our chief purpose is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. Those two, our heart satisfaction and the glory of God in our lives, those always go together. They are inseparable. Not only do we get to glorify God so that we get to enjoy him, that's part of what this verse is saying, but there's more. As we walk along the paths of righteousness, it's a path that leads us on mission. It's a path that leads us on service. In which we do that, we get to glorify God before and make much of his name before the world and the watching world. You see how this is even tied into mission. We want to make much of his name here on Sunday mornings. We want to glorify the name of God and be glad in him and enjoy him here on Sundays. But when we leave that door, that doesn't change. Here it's worship, out there we call it mission. So in closing, if you believe in Jesus, that he is your life, that he is your shepherd, you follow him, then bring glory to his name. Make much of his name. Do that here on Sundays. That's why we come on Sundays, so that we can worship him. And if we're honest with our lives as we think of our week, how often do we do that throughout the week? So let's be faithful on Sundays to worship God. But we don't just do that. We don't make much of his name here on Sundays. It's in our home, before our family. Let's make much of the name of God. In our place of work, let's work in such a way. Let's walk in such a way. Let's work in a way that is righteous and good so that God is glorified in how we work. If you're a student in schools, honor God with your work in school. It means don't cheat. It means let your work be your work. Honor him in your studies. On the sports pitch, wherever it is before the watching world, honor God. Walk in the pathway of righteousness. We've seen who he is. We've seen how he provides. We've seen how he leads. This is our God. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Let's pray.